This is Good Girl Gone Human, an ongoing conversation that serves the frequency of rehumanization. We believe that in striving towards being good and away from being bad, we can lose touch with our humanity and uniqueness. Our hope is that in expanding our capacity to accept our own humanity, we expand the capacity to accept and hold each other's humanity as well.
We welcome uncertainty and questions with curiosity. This is not a roadmap for the right way to be human. We hold tenderly how seductive and human it is to reach for a formula that will provide a sense of certainty and safety. This is not that place, but rather a place for dropping into our big, messy questions.
This isn't just for the recovering good girls out there, but for every human who desires to peel off the layers that hide the wholeness of who they are.
We want to tell the stories of how messy and complicated and beautiful it is to find ourselves in the aftermath of this shedding. There is space for your story, and we want you to join us on this journey of rehumanization. Hi, humans. Welcome
Hello.
back. Welcome back to another episode of Good Girl Gone Human. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Kristina.
How are you doing? How are you feeling after last week and recording our first episode? What was this week like for you?
Oh, it was kind of a lot, like kind of an emotional roller coaster. Sitting here with you for episode 2 feels like it's bringing up all of the themes of the podcast, all of the themes that we want to touch on in this good ongoing conversation of rehumanization. I feel simultaneously really grateful for being here with you and doing this with you and doing like a brave new hard thing. And also this week was a lot of like severely doubting if I could do this. And as I'm sitting here with you, and here we go, our second time, I feel an immense pressure to get it right. And then this weird like bullying of myself of that's not the point. The literal point of the podcast is dropping the good label. And so I felt like I just need to name that like, I've got myself. I have my connection with you. And there's like this bully in my head right now of you're a hypocrite. You're trying so hard to get it right. So I think like, yeah, thinking about this topic we wanted to bring in and like really sit with today of belonging and how learning to being like consenting to the journey of rehumanizing yourself risks belonging. I just kind of wanted to name like, okay, how am I doing? Sometimes it feels hard to drop into this space, one, because we're new and we're allowed to be new, and that's okay to be nervous, but also that there's like all of the potential what ifs and consequences of sharing my voice. It's taken me a lot to get here and to feel safe in sharing my voice. And I think I just need to let it be okay to really humanize myself in this moment. It's okay if you haven't fully found that inner safety in sharing your voice. It's a journey and I'm not alone. How's that for how you doing?
It makes so much sense. I mean, that's how I felt this week. I was like, we did this vulnerable thing and it took so much energy out of us because we had so much energy and love and care to pour into it. And it felt new and it felt hard and we felt proud of ourselves. And then the next day, I mean, we were texting each other and we were both like feeling ill. You know, I mean, it's like our bodies were just like, okay. I mean, you talk about safety. It's like, am I safe to do this? And I totally have the bully, very critical voice in my head that is like, oh, you don't feel safe? Like, you're so safe. Look at you. Look at your life. Look at whatever. And so I think it's this like, oh yeah, the belonging piece is so important because I think there's some people who could still look at me and be like, you haven't put any good girl label down. You still act like that all the time. And then there's some people who know me and they might say, oh, I don't know you like that at all, as trying to be a good girl. And so there's this humanizing I have to do to myself and this reckoning I have to have with myself as I put my voice out there, that I get to show up who I am today. And it's not my responsibility how that's received by people. Oh, and that feels
I needed to hear that.
It just feels terrible because of course we care about how we're received, and of course we care that this work matters and that what we're creating matters. But this week was just very interesting and a great opportunity to practice this work. Like you said, like, okay, I'm dealing with all the things that we're about to talk about. And that pressure we feel is really internal. And I think because we're bringing this to an audience, we're welcoming them in to watching our process. And that's not to say our process is perfected or the right way. We would both adamantly disagree with that. But the process is vulnerable and it's real and it's true to how we're feeling right now. And so I'm settling into like, yes, I'm having this great conversation with my friend who is safe to me, and we do love talking about this stuff. And it's okay that we can't ignore the fact that there's risk involved and what that risk looks like for belonging, for acceptance of ourselves, and just like in the community. And so I see you.
Yeah.
I totally see you.
I see
and
you too.
It just makes a lot of sense because I think making art, and it feels really bold for us to call what we're doing art, but making art takes bravery. It takes courage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what that brought up in me as you were talking is like this idea, like this idea of belonging, that if I'm working so hard to figure out ahead of time how I'm going to be perceived, how we're going to be received, if I'm almost like making this humanizing language like my new dogma, like, oh, if I'm going to be putting my voice out there talking about such an important thing, but I am like privately behind the scenes working really, really hard to be good, it's like I'm giving that power away to literally, we don't know who yet. Like, we are building the audience in real time, and it's reminding me of like, you know, being on this healing journey. And you know, what even do I mean by healing journey? This process of realizing I was giving my power away to authorities outside of me, literally anyone, because that act of self-abandonment is what kept me safe. And so to then be on this healing journey of how do I like bring my power back to me and take responsibility for my own life and my own journey, in the process of doing that, it can be isolating. And so sometimes that's like comfortable even, to just be alone and doing your like therapy, like whatever, so internal. And I think that there's like a conflict or like a both and that I'm holding, that it is very much an inside job to humanize yourself, to drop the label of good, drop the label of bad. But the reality is we can't breeze past the fact just that like we need people. So I feel like this, even in this art that we're creating, it's like we're doing this in the hopes of building a community of other people that want to join us on this journey, not as like the authorities of like, we have figured this out and like buy our course on how to be more human. It's more like we've done a lot of internal work, and now we're just doing like the next part out loud. And so, like you said, the risk, there's immense risk in losing belonging. And so there's almost like this push and pull, like, no, why are you doing this? Go back in where it's safe. So I guess I'm kind of like chewing on that, like this balance of we need people. I've tried. I've tried to get rid of them. It doesn't work. It's like we need each other. But it's like, what do we do with the reality that sometimes when we need people, we lose connection with ourselves. We lose belonging with ourselves in effort to belong with the other. How do we belong to ourselves and with each other?
Yes. Yeah. I think it like taps on that just word belonging. Like, what belong to who? To what? Just to myself? Do I just belong to me? Because at the end of the day, yes, there is this level in my heart and spirit right now. Like, I do belong to me. I'm responsible for me. I can love myself really well. At the end of the day, it's me and me, you know, like against the world. And then there's that temptation to be like, and so I'm going to protect myself from everyone else. You know, that isolation piece is like always right there when you're talking about belonging. But you're right that there's something bigger, and there's no denying that community is essential to not only our survival, but our thriving. And part of that is in the witnessing. And I think like thinking about our creativity and this art that we want to make, it makes me think of the Toko-pa Turner. She wrote that book, Belonging. And she says, creativity is essential to belonging because it helps us to recognize each other. And so I think as we're like willing to put our art out there and be creative with this ongoing conversation, we're saying, do you see yourself here? Like, am I alone? And we have to like bet that we're not. Yeah. I think we believe that we're not alone. And so other people can reflect back to us, and it can make us feel more real. I think that goes hand in hand with putting down this good girl or good label. It's like, oh, I am real and I can be real, which is sometimes really good. And sometimes the realness that I have to offer, it just looks like good girl stuff because that's how I'm feeling. But if that's where it stops, I think I'm cutting myself off from myself. That self-abandonment that you're talking about plays into this belonging so well, because why am I abandoning myself? It's so that I am accepted by others and therefore I have safety. Maybe it's kind of like tribalism or like some ancient thing within us. Like, if I'm alone, I'm not safe. If I'm alone, I won't survive. So if I have loud things to say, or if I want to dress in a weird way or do something that's maybe out of the box, there is this like primal instinct that's like shrink back, be safe, belong. But I love that you brought it to like, I have to belong to myself within community. So what do we do with that? I mean, you know, it's just like such a big question to go back and forth on. I want to isolate, but I know I need to belong. If I belong, will I have to abandon myself? Which parts? Why? I mean, the tension you're talking about is so obvious and clear. And I think so many people have felt that tension. Will I belong if all of me shows up today?
Oof, yeah. And as you're talking, it's really like settling into me that it's a process, and it might be a forever process. And can that be okay? Like, as we're talking about doing a new thing, the audacity to call it art, really settling into how much we care and being honest about that. We're not like, whatever, man, this is just a thing we're trying. Like, we've talked about like our intentionality behind this conversation, like we want it to build community. Like, it's a process. It's a process of observing. It goes, I feel like I'm like going back and forth between this is an inside job. No, we need each other. But like the inside job part of it is recognizing we were all handed a script, I suppose, you know, like you and I relate on like the growing up in religion and leaving religion. That's one way it could look, but we all have this script and these standards of what it looks like to be good. And those things kept us safe. So the inside job part of it is like really just observing. It's not like kind of what I was feeling at the beginning of this podcast. I got to figure out how to do this, like putting the good label down right now, or I don't qualify to share my voice. It's like, no, it's actually a process of gentle observing, even gently observing the mean teenage parts of us that we've been noticing a lot, that observing and doing the hard work. I think one of the hardest parts of this process for me has been recognizing we will lose belonging with other people. To take radical responsibility and say, I need to show up as me. And that will, if I put down trying to be good for this other person or this other group, I might lose belonging with them in order to keep me. But calling it a process kind of like reduces the anxiety around, you don't have to just like, like bulldoze ahead. It could be like step by step. And there's so much room for watching yourself trying really hard to be good and be like, that's actually what I needed to do today. And I see how I abandoned myself. And now is there a safe person I could talk to about how in order to keep belonging with this person, I abandoned myself today. Can you witness me in that? But also the reality is sometimes in this like void liminal space that is trying to put down the good label, like sometimes we feel like we don't belong with anyone and that we are alone.
Yeah. Sitting in that void is painful and it's becoming a practice for me. It's become a practice for me that the way I grew up for a long time, which we've touched on, like religion, there was a certainty there that also brought belonging, to be like, we all believe this certain thing, therefore we belong. Anything that was maybe different about us, the self-abandonment, maybe even that was happening in those spaces, was permissible because we all had the certainty on this same thing. So, man, in my hard times, what I miss the most is certainty. And so when I find myself clinging to some new dogma, some new fundamentalism, I try to have a lot of grace for myself that, yeah, in a lot of ways, life felt easier when I thought I knew all the answers.
Yes.
And I did belong to different places. A part of me belonged to different places. But it's been a journey to realize that it was only part of me belonging. I can kind of idealize that time for me in the church where I belonged because there was this core value, but how many people actually knew me, or how well did I even know myself, really is like the thing I had to reckon with first. Do I even know myself, my own preferences, my own darkness? Have I been able to like look at the parts of me that are really hard to bear? Because I didn't ever want to, and I didn't really ever have to have belonging in certain spaces. And so for me, that certainty piece was a huge loss. For a while, it felt like a really big thing to grieve. Like, I'm not certain what I believe. And if I'm not certain what I believe, well, now I just lost some belonging for sure. And then if I can settle into, oh, I'm not certain what I believe. After I've sat with the loss, there's kind of this opening and this expansiveness that can come after, when it's like, okay, let's sort it out. Let's figure out what we believe. But the end goal for me is no longer certainty. Oh, and it like, I even have to exhale when I say that. It's like, is that true? Because I miss
Sure.
it so much. But the end goal for me is curiosity about myself and others, the world, the way it works, the way we're connected, the way we self-abandon, the way we isolate. And I think I'm thinking of a song by Maddie, Zahm. It's called You Might Not Like Her. And there's this line that she says, that good girl you were was really fucking bad at being real. And when I heard, I know, listen to that song. We'll put it in the episode notes because it's amazing. But it's just like, yeah, I was good. I was a really good girl. I still am sometimes. I'm not all bad. We talk about this. The podcast name is not called Good Girl Gone Bad.
Yeah.
We didn't go bad. We're not these bad apples, We went human. But when I was good, I was really bad at being real. And that's because the realness was risky. And the risk was losing belonging. So I think learning to sit in this void of like, I don't know. You actually find a lot of people who are like, wait, you don't know? I don't know either. There's new belonging in the exile and in the void too, but it's really hard. That certainty piece was a really big loss for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I see a lot of myself in that story, and hearing you share that, I'm wondering, like, is the, not that there's like a, oh, we just figured out with certainty the formula, but is the antidote to that horrible feeling of uncertainty curiosity? Like when you said that word, I was like, oh, I felt like in my days of certainty, which also looked like religion and knowing all the answers of the world through this particular worldview, that's what kept me safe. There was no curiosity. I wasn't curious at all. I looked at the world through very black and white, and I looked for where people were on my side and were not on my side. And I grieve for that very long season of my life, like 27 years or something, because there's so much to be curious about. And I remember feeling this pinch of like when I felt like I need a break from church. The way that I allowed myself at that time to feel brave to step away was I convinced myself I needed a new denomination, which all that means, if you're not familiar with religion in Christianity, there's lots of different ways to practice Christianity. So I thought maybe the way I always did it is simply just not resonating with me. I'm going to try new churches. As soon as I left, I was like, there was this new level of safety. I felt like, oh my God, I could not get my body to church, to any church. And that was a big process. It's almost like I couldn't admit to myself that I needed to really, really step away. And looking back, I feel really grateful for, it was kind of a good girl part to say, oh, don't worry, you won't not go to church. Next Sunday, you'll go to this like new denomination. And I never went back. And I guess that's what I mean by process. It's like we're allowed to be exactly where we're at. That is being human. And also there's space to grow. And also there's so many of us that are experimenting with putting this certainty down. And then we're in this liminal space and it feels so alone. And so we're trying to bridge this gap of like, all of you belongs here. And what happens when we put that down, that certainty that has kept us safe and embraced curiosity, I feel like it's so interesting. On one hand, it could disrupt relationships. You can lose belonging with people. On another hand, you could, in becoming more real with yourself, have more real, deep relationships. What if there's something that is near and dear to you and you feel a strong, strong opinion about something, which, by the way, we're not against. We're not like anti-religion. We have some beef with it and we have some scars, maybe even still some wounds that haven't all the way healed yet, but like we're not anti. We don't want to form this community that's like against religion. But like, what if, so like strong opinions are so human. Like we all have our one unique perspective we're seeing the world from. And we are advocating for staying curious and open and embracing uncertainty, but like it's part of being human to like feel strongly about things. So what if you feel strongly about something and I don't? Does that mean we don't belong with each other? Or can we each deepen our individual process of knowing I've got me, I belong to me, this is what I really feel right now. This is who I did or did not vote for. This is what I do or do not do on Sunday mornings with my time. Whatever the dogma or the certainty is around, what is that process of learning to belong deeply to ourselves and with each other? And I feel like I'm on a journey of really figuring that out. I don't feel like I have the answers, but I think curiosity, to keep coming back to curiosity is the way through.
It reminds me of when I first did step away from the church that I was at. And there was this instinct, and it was just the perfect time of culture, what was happening. Deconstruction podcasts were like a really big thing at the time. There were a lot of them. There were a few that were really popular, and it was really easy to go like, okay, 180, I'm like pivoting here. Here's some community because these people have a shared certainty with me. But the new certainty was that we're certain it's not this way, and you're kind of are finding belonging in the things you don't believe now or something. And I think I had to go through this journey of stepping away from what my faith was, and the church that I was at was really painful. And I lost belonging because I realized I didn't share similar values or beliefs. And so going then to this deconstruction space, which at the time had a lot of anger and a lot of grief that was coming out as anger, I think, for a lot of people. And trying to be in those spaces and listening to that kind of content, I was still abandoning myself because they were talking about religion, faith, God, spirituality, community. They were kind of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater and just saying like all of this is bad. And so I was still self-abandoning, being like, wait, that's not true. Like, did you not experience beautiful community there? Like, have you not experienced connection? Did you not experience like just those supernatural faith moments? And I know like music's really important to both of us. And it's like, I would be lying if I said I didn't miss like worship as an experience of music with people. Sure. Now, what that means to me looks really different now. And I haven't experienced that in a long time, but the self-abandoning part and the certainty part, like we're all being pulled to that. Because I saw even the people that left like, okay, we're not certain about this faith tradition anymore. Oh, but we're certain about this, right? Like we just latched onto a new thing. And so when you talk about it being a process and what this process looks like, I feel like I have walked that road a little, and it doesn't feel like a straight path. It does feel like that spiral dynamic where you like keep hitting a point and you're like, oh, I thought I dealt with this, but here it is on a different level, like that coil shape. And so yeah, you kind of walk back around and go, oh, but there's certainty again. Like I kind of thought I worked through not being so attached to certainty, and here it is again. And then I keep walking around and it's like, oh, there's curiosity again. That feels really good. And here's a moment of belonging. Here's a moment where I'm isolating. Like that journey feels really cyclical. And I think it gives us a lot of grace for ourselves to notice when we are hitting those markers again, and to not be like, like you're back at certainty and you haven't grown at all. Because that's not true.
No,
that's not true. I think the next like piece of it that comes to mind for me is like, okay, we talk about this certainty and like having the courage to sit in the void and what that looks like. But the other thing I experienced when I've lost belonging or put down good labels is that courage to be seen as like selfish. Do you know what I mean? The courage to be seen as, I don't know. I mean, can you expand on that? Do you know what I'm saying? Like with that feeling of like, I'm doing something for myself and people just like not understanding how that was actually the healthiest thing for you at the time.
Sure. Yeah. So many thoughts flooding my head around that. That word selfish, I've really spent a few years now unshaming that word. I've come to actually really like that word. It feels like to be good, you should be abandoning yourself. And, you know, we are talking about religion a lot because that's our background, so that's going to happen. But as like, you know, girls raised in church, there is this idea that like you are here to serve the other. And here's the thing, we're not advocating like, nope, you're all on your own, don't serve anybody. But it is so scary to advocate for yourself and your own space and your own time and your own needs after, like, not just in religion. There is this narrative that it is good to abandon yourself for the sake of the other. And that's where it's holding the both and, right? Like, sometimes we need our community to powerfully come through for us because we really need something. And, you know, so it's not, there's good, bad, like, right, wrong. It's my friend wants my attention. I don't have it to give. Will I lose this friend if I say no? I love you. Today is just, there's no capacity to hold space. That is kind of what I mean by selfish, is this the first step there is being really close to your inner knowing, which is hard to do. And I don't think that it's really possible to like do that all the time, because that's part of being human, is I lost it and I found it. And I really actually need to be seen as good right now because my boss, blah, 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 like I need this job. You know, it's not that we're trying to build a new dogma or morality around this, but how that relates to being selfish is like, there might be, we'll just, you know, since I started the friendship example, like stretch that out. There might be friends that really benefit from you trying really hard to be good. Yeah. And there's a risk in saying, you matter and I matter. And sometimes I need to say no to you, because I will get, for me, this is how it felt in my journey, I will get so swallowed up by the needs of other people if I'm not being selfish. But there's a reason why. It's not always the other person's fault. Mm-hmm. I feel valuable if I'm helping you. I am proving that I am worth friendship if I'm giving you something. I'm proving that I'm good. I'm a good person. Even leaving religion, it's like, I sometimes feel like this is kind of sounds so paranoid. You know what? I have maybe a little bit of a paranoid part. I feel like I'm being watched. Like, oh, you left religion? Like, good girl gone bad time? And it's like, well, no, I'm actually peeling off all of the layers that have never been me. And I realize that takes a lot of privilege, is a word that's coming to mind. Like, the privilege just in the space, in the inner space I've created, the capacity I've built to tolerate potential rejection, for saying, I actually need way more space for myself than I've ever had. And there are people that fall away because that's not okay. It touches everything. I feel like I'm being so long-winded, but like, ideas of how families are supposed to look, how mothers are supposed to be, how children are supposed to behave in certain ways in order to keep belonging, in order to not be seen as selfish and bad. And so maybe lost the thread here of like, you asked me selfish and I'm just like, bleh. Yeah. I think that this has been a big part of my humanizing journey. Is I even feel activated right now. Like, oh, I don't want people to think I'm just like this selfish, privileged, like white girl that can do a podcast. Like, but also like, what if I kind of am?
You kind of are, right? Because here we are. But no, I hear you. And I think the activation, even the long-windedness, it makes sense, because we're like, wait, how many times in places and ways have I self-abandoned? And it's not conscious. Like, it's not this thing where we're like, I'm going to abandon myself so that I belong. It's so subconscious and it's so subtle. And I think I first experienced this, like the friendship part of this. I'm thinking about a friend, and she would say the phrase to me, I love your no. Like, when she asked me something, she'd say, do you want to help me with this? Or can you come over? Can you watch my kids? Can you do anything? I mean, the ask wasn't even big, or it could be big or small. And she'd just preface it by saying, hey, I love your no, but can we do this thing? Could you help me? And the permission of like, you love my no. Like, my no is part of my self-care, my selfishness. Yeah. And that really like flipped it on my head for me. And I've used that in other relationships, just like, hey, love your no. You're still valuable, you know, when you talk about value and friendship. And so I think this belonging piece is so tender, because it's like I said at the beginning, belong to who? Belong to what? Like, it's very vulnerable to even desire belonging. Ooh. And I think that's where I'm like, okay, like, of course we all desire it. That's why we try to polish ourselves up. That's why we try to appear that we're just good, that we're not the full spectrum of the human experience, because I want to be easy, because when I'm easy, it's easier for me to belong. It can touch, the family you grew up in. And if your family wasn't a family where everyone was fighting or advocating for their needs or loud about what they needed, but it was more this quiet, like save the peace sort of mode. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've experienced that where it's just like, okay, the best thing here is to just like not rock the boat. That's an easy way where you can be like, I belong because we're all in it together. And so I just think when I think about being selfish and how being called selfish just for like your no, or just for taking a minute to make sure that you're like even capable of showing up for people. And there's so many stories I have where I have self-abandoned in the name of being a good friend, a good mother, good daughter, whatever all the things we want to list are, and having to step back. It feels actually really terrible when you take that moment and say, I don't think I can be here for you this much.
Yeah.
And that's where we definitely, we joke about like, this isn't good girl gone bad, but there is this feeling of like, am I bad? Like, it's so deep when you're like, am I bad because I can't abandon myself anymore for your sake? And that's where everybody doing this work is so important, because I can't do your work for you. I can't make you see how valuable your own time and resource and energy are to you. But once I see them for myself and I can advocate for them, I do believe that people see that. And it's not like emulate me, I've got it right. But I do believe that like liberated people liberate people, and like freedom brings freedom. And so when I think about just these ideas of sitting in uncertainty, being willing to be seen as selfish, like putting down these good labels, these are huge, huge, hard things. But at the end of the day, the goal isn't just like be the best human you can be. The goal, I'm thinking, it's like coming out in real time, but it's like, is it to have like a beautiful, rich life that is full of all these parts that aren't as polished? Because even some of those dark times or the dark things we let other people see about us actually do bring more belonging at the end of the day, like a true, real belonging that we can settle into and not have to perform day and night to try to keep up,
Yeah. Something that's just sticking with me from all that is the story of your friend saying, I love your no. It felt like she was, embracing your humanity, and she was protecting your peace and she's saying you matter. You matter. I felt like that's a really good example of like she's letting you belong to you. Mm-hmm. And saying, and I need a friend.
Yeah.
And you belong to you. And to your other point, she probably could have only shown up for you. I would imagine, I don't know who this is, but she could only show up for you in that way because she's honoring her own no. She's done that work for herself. And I would like to imagine someone's also probably done that for her as well. So it's like this interwoven, like how could it not be? Like I feel like after like a lifetime of abandoning myself in the name of being good, I swung to the other extreme of like, okay, well now I can't have me and the other two. So I'm going to just like not ask for what I need. I'm trying to find kind of like the more messy middle, because it really is interwoven with, you have to trust each other to do that really big, scary work of one. Sometimes it's as simple as getting to know what your needs are, because we all, like I said, have whatever template we were given in our early years. We bring that into our friendships. We bring that into our partnerships and in our parenting journeys in whatever communities we're in. So this work isn't like we got to do the work and figure out a new version of being good. It's I keep hearing the word like slow down. Ooh, okay. I need to say no to my friend and I feel bad. I feel like a bad friend. I'm going to trust that my friend has got herself and could handle my no. And I might really struggle with the alarms going off in my head that I feel really bad. That feels like the messiness of being human. And then sometimes that could lead to, wow, I needed to sit with some younger parts of me that are saying, this is how we would have lost belonging. Like, how dare you? We've worked so hard to belong. How dare you like disrupt that? So sometimes the work could be sitting with those like almost like inflamed or like alarmed parts of us and say, hey, I hear you and we're trying something new and it's really scary. And then sometimes that, you know, that's the inner work. And sometimes it might look like an extra vulnerable step of asking your friend, partner for reassurance. Like, hey, it was actually like really big and scary for me to say no. And there's havoc in my brain because I chose myself. Can you let me know that you still love me? Mm-hmm. How human is that? Like, not now I'm really good at advocating for myself and I'm this wall and I'm they can just suck it if they don't like it. It's like, whew, it's so tender. It's so tender. And I think if I could pull in something you said earlier about the deconstruction space, if that feels okay to like weave that in, like it makes all the sense in the world to me that leaving that certainty, not only leaving the certainty, but leaving this framework where someone said this certainty is how you're safe. Mm-hmm. If you give power to this certainty into this system, you will be saved in our case. How much sense does it make for there to be so much anger and so much grief? And also being like, I felt some of that. Sometimes I pop into those deconstruction podcasts. I'm like, I just need to hear you say something like, really angry. And like, can I also let that be a part of my experience too? And then for me, I feel like everyone has a different process with it. For me, I felt like I couldn't stay there because it became my new, now I'm like angry, like activist against high control religion or something. But here's the thing. We all are one person. What do I mean? We all are individuals that need to like figure out what our work is in the world. There are some people that might want to spend the rest of their lives advocating for the harm done by certain high control religions. And that's not good, bad, right, or wrong. That is their journey. And I think that where we're coming together here is our work is different than that. But not that that's bad or dehumanizing or like it can be a new dogma. It's like everyone's got to like look inward for if, you know, where they fall on that. But I think that the word grief keeps coming to mind. Like, I feel like you and I are coming together in this like grief. Like, I feel so much grief at being human a lot of the time. So if we can like be angry and figure out our new certainty and then like preach that, I find myself when I'm in that state, I don't really ever touch the grief.
Yeah.
And so the tender place of, ooh, can we drop in, slow down, sit with the terror of, am I bad? Am I selfish? How will I ever know? Well, you find people who will reflect your own innate worthiness to you in the messiness of being human.
Yeah. And you do the work of continuing to rehumanize those parts of you that were just trying to keep you safe. I mean, some of the most like profound moments for me, instead of being like, like there's nothing like a Facebook memory to just really pull me back into humility, where I earnestly believed that I could save everybody. Now it makes me laugh and cry at the same time, because poor thing, like poor 17-year-old who felt the literal weight of the world's salvation on her shoulders in the way that she acted, in the way she represented a belief system. oh, it like just, it could break my heart all over again. And also, like, sweet part, she cared so much. Mm-hmm. And that desire to be a good example came from deep love for people and for what I thought was right. And so can I rehumanize that part of me and show up with tenderness towards her? That was where I was at that time. And it doesn't have to be good or bad. It was different. I was living a different kind of human experience than I am now. But both of them have served me. Both of them have been for my growth and my development and my expansion. I am who I am today because I got to be her for a little bit. And so I think, yeah, I mean, it goes back to that Maddie song of just like, you might not like her, but I do, like, because she's talking to her older self. Like, if you could see how I am now, like, you wouldn't like her, but I do. And I think I have to look back at that version of me before. And sometimes I'm like, I don't like her, but I do. I do like that she was part of who I am because it gives me a different compassion for people. And so this process of rehumanizing ourselves is like remembering that we are human, which is a full spectrum. And that's the in rehumanizing, because we could just say we're humanizing ourselves, but I actually hold this belief that like we were human before we were anything else. So you talk about this programming or this like script or this kind of like way that we have, but before we had any of that, like we were human and we have spirit and there's these like base things. And so the rehumanizing is like coming back to the like goodness of being human, which is raw and scary and vulnerable and also just really real. It's just really real.
Really real. And what you shared about like thinking about those old parts of us that can sometimes make us cringe or like we feel grief for how much fear they had to hold. Yeah. And like the weight of the certainty, honestly, like I'm certain about this. So now I have to make everybody else certain of what I'm certain of so that I feel safe. There's so much grief. And then, like you said, like it's not just humanizing, it's rehumanizing, because it's kind of like a big, fat, scary, juicy word of dehumanizing. But the truth is, like you said, we came in this world just like so human. We cried when we needed to cry. We like all that stuff. Yes. And just whatever our individual life looked like in childhood, there are some of us, probably the people that will end up listening to our podcast, that do resonate with the word dehumanized. And so the process of rehumanization, but something that's like sticking out to me is I can be tempted to, I'm rehumanizing myself now, like make those older, you kind of already saying this, but those older parts of me, those past versions of me that still live within me, the bad guy. So sometimes it's like, this is where it's an inside job, is like there could be all these parts that are at war with each other because one part doesn't feel safe about the part that's trying to rehumanize because I felt safe before. So it's like, it's not about quieting those parts, like, shut up, we're doing it different now. Here's our new certainty. There's like this opportunity to slow down and say, thank you. Thank you for keeping me safe. Like, honestly, it does break my heart to remember how hard I had to work to be good and to be seen as good. And I feel like I missed out on getting to know myself as a child. And I feel like I'm getting to know myself for the first time now. And there's so much grief there. But I don't think it could have gone any other way. So I feel so much gratitude towards the good girl parts of me because she kept me safe. She kept me from crumbling under the weight of, I wasn't ready to hold the liminal space of uncertainty until I was ready to hold it.
Right.
And every single human that you come across and like crosses your path every single day is ready to hold what they're ready to hold and not ready to hold,
Right. Yeah. That's where the risk of saying, some of the examples you've given, like I can go back to my friend or my partner and say, can you give me this reassurance? There's kind of the risk that they might not be able to, like there is this risk always of losing belonging. And I think if we can kind of go like zoom out a little bit, we've like zoomed in, like we belong to ourselves. And then there's this zooming out, like I will belong and unbelong and belong and unbelong over and over again because I'm always growing. And so maybe sometimes when I don't belong somewhere anymore, I can grieve that. That's very real. And also that could be a sign of my expansion. And not that I'm better than some group that I'm evolving out of, but just that there's some new opportunity for me there. And so that's kind of where I've had to like just ground into myself and know like, I don't know if it's kind of like that sitcom era where you're like, I'll have this group of friends and we'll just be together forever and ever and see each other every day. And I'm still like kind of trying to work through like the loss of like, what does friendship really look like? What does partnership really look like? And can I belong to something for a short while or even a long while and have that be really good until I don't belong there anymore? I mean, on a really like deep personal level, I could think about my divorce and like my marriage was where I belonged for a long time. And when we didn't belong there anymore, that wasn't the end. I mean, there is like a risk of unbelonging, and there's also this grit of the human spirit that I don't want to miss out on. That's like, and like we've just rise again and we expand again and new opportunities come to us. And I think it's really beautiful that the more real we become, the more human we become, we can attract other people who can hold more parts of us. And that's the reflecting back to each other and seeing each other and not believing. I don't want to get so caught up in the risk of losing the belonging because that will happen. And just because you lose belonging somewhere or in something doesn't mean that you are lost forever and like go be alone now because we don't want you anymore. I just think there's an invitation to, I love your phrase, slow down and look around. Where could I belong? Where will I belong next? Who is ready for this iteration of me? Who can hold space for maybe this real, raw version of me that I'm still getting to know myself? And that's where I find myself really in community now. There was a huge stage of loneliness after leaving a faith community because it's really set up to provide for a lot of your needs, you know, like, anyway, your kids have needs, you have multi-generational relationships, you have all these really beautiful things that I think the church can provide. And when that's gone, you're like, hey, what do we do? And even just the rhythm of seeing people maybe every Sunday, if that's the faith tradition. And so on this side of it, which has been a really long, painful, lonely, exciting journey, it's like I can create belonging by bringing my art. We'll talk about like my women's circles one day too, but bringing these things, when I put my creativity out there, when I put this new version of me out there, it can attract people who are ready for you. And so I just don't want to I don't want the risk of losing belonging to become a new roadblock where you don't humanize yourself, because it's very real and the grief is really real of losing it. But it's not like the end of the story, you know?
What I'm hearing in that is expanding our capacity for grief.
Yeah. And hope, which is equally vulnerable.
I'm like, no, grief. And you're like, but hope.
It's an equally vulnerable emotion, but expanding our capacity for grief. Yeah.
It's almost like if we know, I lost. I loved and I lost, and there's grief. And I held myself in that instead of abandoning myself to not lose it. As hard as this sounds, is like, I could do that again. I can hold myself because I ultimately do belong to myself. And to stay close to myself means that as I have these new iterations, if there are people that like you said, just meant to journey with for a little while, to know I can hold myself in this grief and then hold the hope that I'm not going to be alone forever. But that brave act of like letting yourself be witnessed. And there's this like quote that is floated around at least my Instagram algorithm for like ever and ever. Every time I see it, I'm like, oh, it says like, pay attention to who around you says, I'm happy to know this version of you too. And that could be like a romanticized way of saying the sitcom thing. Like, ooh, just got to work really hard to find the people that will never, ever leave you and then be really grippy. We actually get to do that for ourselves first. I've got me. I know that I have held myself in the grief of losing that faith community. And for me, like a story that was coming in my head, you mentioned your women's circles. That was that came from like your creative urge to create something beautiful. And yeah, we will have a whole episode talking about that. As you said that, I felt this warmth because I was in a season of isolation before I went to the very first women's circle I went to of yours. And I had this really like warm, hopeful feeling going. I just was like, I'm meant to be in this space. And you held such a beautiful space for women to witness each other in their humanity. There was no fixing, there's no saving, there's no certainty. It was space to be witnessed as you are now. And I felt belonging there. And that, for me, showing up that day is a big reason why we're sitting here doing a podcast today. That was our reconnection. Even though we orbited around each other in childhood and we're in the same communities. So it's really like a testament to you belonging to you and you being brave in holding yourself in the grief of all the losses you have and then creating something beautiful out of it for people like me and a ton of other people that have enjoyed your circles to find new belonging in as they continue to find belonging with themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like this picture of taking responsibility for your belonging. And I think, when I've gone into new places, I think about it when I'm leading circles too. But like when I joined this like little surf group that I did a couple times, it's like I know what it feels like to be new. And when I would go to new things like that, as someone who does like hold communal space, I kind of like watch just like how are new people received? What does it feel like? And I like putting myself in this. I mean, I don't like it in the moment, but in hindsight, I'm very introspective about what it feels like to be new in a space. And I have learned that there is this responsibility, we call it radical responsibility, that we have to take for our own belonging too. And I think there's sometimes this like, well, this is me. This is just the way I am. Who can love this version of me? And it's like kind of passive. And the other part of that is going like, where can I seek out like-minded people? Where can I seek out people who think differently than me so I can be challenged? And taking responsibility for our belonging too, because we have us, because I belong to me, I can play, I can bring a lightheartedness to this. I think, we vacillate between just like the deep end of the pool. We love the deep thoughts and we can get like very existential and then I also hold a lot of space for myself to experience lightheartedness and joy and just sort of like, all of this is just a big experiment and we get to play. And I think being human and this conversation about belonging is heavy because it's just the ache of our hearts to belong. And the confusion we feel now with social media and the like little echo chambers that are created around us that make us think everyone thinks the same way as us. Then we go out in the real world and it's like a little disorienting and we're aching to like know that we matter and to know that somebody else sees us. And so it is like a very heavy, real, serious conversation. And like, can I play with figuring out where I belong? Can I bring some lightheartedness to this human experience and just like know that I've got me? I love when one of the things you say to me a lot is like, I trust you with you. And I've really like taken that on and just like, oh, you trust me with me. So I can play, I can experiment. I can, maybe move through the world in a different way and look for belonging in a different way. That doesn't have to be So heavy. It's both. It will be both.
It
but
will be
just
both.
Permission for both. Permission for both.
I really am grateful you brought that in, because I feel like I often need to be initiated into my playfulness. And I'm sitting here thinking how sweet that we can be really silly. But that isn't a lot of how we showed up here on this episode, because we are feeling, one, the heaviness of the conversation, the importance and the care around this topic, and the nerves kind of shut down my silliness. But this invitation of like permission to let it be playful and an experiment, and there isn't this pressure to get it right. And really, it's a big invitation. Like for us, you and me, it's we're carving out this space, spending our time and our energy on creating this space to have an ongoing conversation. And it's an invitation like, hey, any humans out there, feel a sense of belonging with what we're saying. We wanted to really stretch out some of what we alluded to in that first episode and let it feel heavy and then light and then grief. I was feeling a lot of the grief as we were pulling this out of like how much loss that there's been. Yeah. And then now here we are saying, this matters, our voices matter. And I might doubt that it matters sometimes, and all of you is welcome here. And I trust you with you, and I trust me with me. And any humans out there, our listeners, like we really do want to invite you into this, I guess, contemplative experiment, you know, not this new framework. There's a lot of this that's not like the kind of people that will want to listen. This isn't going to be like super new. This isn't revolutionary, like no one's ever talked about how to be human before. But this invitation to belong, to feel like you're not alone, to remember that it's messy and it's fun and it's terrible and it's all of the things. And can we expand our capacity to hold ourselves in the muchness that we are? And then in that expansion of ourselves, we create room to hold each other. Yeah. In that way.
That's the goal.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. And that is why we're here, and it feels so good. And I think, you know, we said it last week, but we're excited to see who comes around us, who is invigorated by these kind of conversations, what you all have to bring to this conversation, what the humans out there have to say. And that's part of why, you know, those other things that play in to making community matter, like Instagram and TikTok, and even maybe seeing our faces, you know, if you are like someone watching your podcast on YouTube, I think there's this connection that we're hoping for. And so we hope that you've enjoyed like listening to this conversation and witnessing our own unfolding of these concepts and our work. And we're just grateful that you would take your time to be part of this conversation with us. So that feels really good too.
I'm feeling a lot of gratitude too. We talk a lot about witnessing, and like, honestly, what just happened is like people being willing to witness us in our process. And I forget the exact quote, but some C.S. Lewis quote about like, me too, like I have this resonance with you. Yeah. And so grateful to the humans out there witnessing our process. And if you feel like tagging along, we would love that. And if you are wanting to join us, it is very possible you resonate with a lot of what we've shared. We love to hear it, like we say. And we want you to know, we want to remind you as you end this podcast and you go on to your normal life and you're in the messy middle of being human, you are an absolute badass and the most fragile thing. Treat yourself as both.
See you next time.